The land of the free is suffering from a self-inflicted injustice when it comes to poverty, experts say, as the rich are getting richer while thousands living without sufficient means die every year in the United States, as a recent study shows. The issue, according to an exclusive poll conducted by Redfield Wilton Strategies on behalf of Newsweek, worries a majority of Americans, who are the impoverished in the world's wealthiest economy. Why is poverty a persistent problem in the United States? Can the United States ultimately eradicate poverty? Here's the story on poverty in the United States, a tale that is not new but often overshadowed by towering skyscrapers. Research by the University of California, Riverside, UCR, published earlier this year in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that the death of 183,000 Americans aged 15 years old and above in 2019 could be attributed to poverty, defined as those with incomes lower than 50% of the U.S. median. 2019, a year before the explosion of the pandemic, was to make mortality rates in the country much worse. In 2019, the median household income was $69,560, and the same year, about 34 million Americans, 10.5% of the country's population, were estimated by the U.S. Census Bureau to be living in poverty. Poverty remains a huge issue in the U.S., much more so than in other countries with similar levels of distributed wealth, and it is a cause of concern for a majority of Americans, as shown by the Newsweek Redfield Wilton Strategies poll. The poll, conducted among a sample of 1,500 eligible voters in the U.S. on May 31st, found that some 53% of Americans are very concerned about the level of poverty in the country. Among Democratic voters, 58% expressed being very concerned, while the corresponding percentage among Republican voters was 48%. Some 21% of Americans responding to the poll don't earn enough money from their primary job to pay bills or maintain their family's standard of living, while 52% are working multiple jobs to tackle the daily cost of living. In terms of gender, 24% of women and 18% of men in the survey stated that they did not earn enough money to pay the bills. Additionally, 57% of men and 49% of women reported that they had multiple jobs. From a different perspective, 77% of individuals in the age group of 35 to 44 stated that they had multiple jobs. This percentage was higher than any other age group surveyed. UCR researchers found that poor people had roughly the same survival rate as wealthier people until they hit the age of 40, after which they died at a significantly higher rate than people with better incomes and resources. According to the UCR study, poverty as a risk factor can be considered the fourth leading cause of death in the U.S. after heart disease, cancer, and smoking. As a risk factor, poverty kills more people than Alzheimer's, strokes, and diabetes. David Brandy, professor of public policy at UCR and lead researcher in the study, told Newsweek. While death is the ultimate bad outcome, poverty has also been linked to several negative health outcomes including stress and depression. Of course, there is some circularity with some health conditions, Brandy said. If you are physically disabled, you have a serious back injury, and you can't walk, that's probably going to make you more economically insecure, which then is going to feed into depression and so forth. These things all work together in concert. The findings of the UCR study also reveal yet another way in which ethnic and racial minorities are disproportionately affected by issues linked to inequality, as these groups are more likely to live in poverty than white people, experts say. According to the latest data made available by the U.S. Census Bureau in 2021, The official poverty rate in the US was 11.6%, an estimated 37.9 million Americans. This is pretty much the same rate reported the year before in 2020, and the same year the median household income was $67,521, a decrease of 2.9% from the 2019 median, and the first statistically significant decline since 2011. In terms of age, race, and gender identity, America's poor are a heterogeneous group of people. Kristen Redfield, Associate Director of Poverty Solutions at the University of Michigan, told Newsweek. But children are more likely to experience poverty than working-age adults. Women are more likely to experience poverty than men. And people of color are more likely to experience poverty than folks who identify as white. This trend, Redfield said, reflect both historic and ongoing discrimination in the policies we have in place in the U.S. Poverty is a policy choice, she said. If we put in place more comprehensive health care, if we put in place better income support, we could do something about that, at least from an income perspective. We don't have parental leave policies like almost all of the Western Europe has. So people who have children often have to miss work if their kids are sick, and that's lower income for them at the end of the day, she continued. These are decisions that we have made as a nation, and if we made some other choices, we could really do something pretty significant when it comes to reducing poverty. According to the latest U.S. Census Bureau data, 12.6% of women in the country lived in poverty in 2020, against 10.3% of men. In the same year, 16% of children under the age of 18, almost 1 in 6 kids, are poor versus 8.9% of seniors aged 65 and older, while 10.1% of white people lived in poverty in 2020. The rate went up to 20%, 19.6%, and 17% among Native Americans, Black and Hispanic people, respectively. Poverty is also much more fluid than people think. Mark Rank, one of the leading experts in poverty, inequality, and social justice, and a professor of social welfare at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, told Newsweek. People move in and out of poverty during their lifetime, he said. Nearly 3/4 of Americans will experience at least 1 year below the poverty line. For most people, poverty is a fairly short-term experience, 1 or 2 years. They won't get above the poverty line. And then something might happen that will throw them back into poverty, but some wouldn't get themselves out. While most of Newsweek, Redfield and Wilton Strategies survey respondents were concerned about the persistence of poverty in the country, and some were directly affected. Many said that the issue was somehow inevitable in a country bent toward economic growth. Some 47% said they agreed that a certain amount of poverty is something that must be accepted in a capitalist, free market society, while 20% disagreed. I can't disagree with this position more, Matthew Desmond, sociologist, Pulitzer Prize winner and author of the book Poverty by America, told Newsweek. I think that there is a ton of evidence that government programs are effective in fighting poverty. We don't have to live with all of this poverty in America. Experts believe that the poverty rate in America has essentially remained the same over the past half-century. So why does the poverty persist persistently in this country? For 50 years, the poverty rate in the U.S. has been remarkably stable. Rebecca Riddell, the economic justice policy lead for Oxfam America, told Newsweek. Using the official definition and the latest census data, the poverty rate in the U.S. currently stands at 11.6%, Riddell said, not too far off from the 11.1% rate the country reported in 1973. It means that if you took a time machine and went back 50 years, the situation would be unchanged for the poor, Riddell said. Meanwhile, the share of income held by the top 1% has grown astronomically. For Riddell, raising wealth at the top and persistent poverty are two sides of the same coin. The collective wealth of the so-called 1%, the wealthiest Americans, reached a record $45.9 trillion at the end of the fourth quarter of 2021, according to a 2022 Federal Reserve's report on household wealth. During the pandemic, their wealth grew by over $12 trillion, more than a third of their total. Persistent poverty in the U.S. is really about policy choices, she said. The choices that have been made on taxes, on the social safety net, on corporate power, on public services, those have not been designed in order to end poverty and hardship. And in many ways, they contributed to skyrocketing inequality. Redfield called the persistence of poverty in America a self-inflicted injustice. According to Mark Rand from the University of Washington, the reasons behind the persistence of poverty in America are attributed to insufficient employment opportunities with fair and adequate wages, and a lack of sufficient support system for struggling Americans to make ends meet. Over the last 30 or 40 years, the U.S. has done a pretty good job in terms of creating new jobs. But many of those jobs are low-paying jobs, jobs that don't have benefits like health insurance, he said. Another big structural failing is that the U.S. does not have a very robust social safety net to protect people from falling into poverty, he continued. So when things happen to people in their lives, like losing a job or getting sick, there is not a lot in place to protect them from falling into poverty. According to sociologist Desmond, poverty persists in America because we haven't made deep enough investments to fight this problem, and because many of us benefit from poverty in America. Some lives are made small so that others might grow, he said. Often we don't recognize that we consume the cheap goods and services that the working poor produce. Half of the country is invested in the stock market directly and indirectly, and they benefit from returns which come from human sacrifice sometimes. We benefit from tax breaks, $1.8 trillion a year in tax breaks, which is double our military spending. Many of us are the beneficiaries of the tax breaks, and we perpetuate a system or contribute or participate in a system where we do a lot more to subsidize affluence than to alleviate poverty, he added. On top of that, Desmond said, we continue to create segregationist communities where the most wealthy neighborhoods are inaccessible to those on lower incomes. The sociologist believes that poverty in America is reflected by the fact that the fundamentals of society are breaking down for a giant chunk of the American public, with many earning lower than livable wages and being trapped in a poverty cycle. If you look at wage stagnation on one hand and rising housing costs, especially for renters, on the other, you get a situation where we have to spend more to stay in the same place, Desmond said. The lack of options for poor people in America, he believes, makes them more vulnerable to being exploited in the housing market, the job industry, and the financial system. By Desmond's calculation, the poor are paying $61 million in fines and fees every single day in overdraft fees, checking cashing fees, and payday loan fees. According to Rand, it is ingrained within the American dream and the country's notorious individualism to believe that poverty is the fault of the individual, the result of people's bad decisions rather than a structural failing, as he believes it is. But during the pandemic, this mindset suddenly changed. People realized that if so many were struggling to make ends meet, it was for reasons above their will, the spread of a deadly virus that led to business closures and major disruptions. During COVID, what you saw was an incredible investment from the federal government and the American people, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Society in the 1960s, Desmond said. The Child Tax Credit was rolled out during COVID-19 and reduced child poverty by 46% in 6 months, he added. Emergency rental assistance, which was a $46.5 billion program and reaches over 10 million working families, plunged evictions to the lowest they have ever been on record, ever. This shows that government programs work. Riddell said that the investment made by the federal government to help lower-income people cope during the pandemic really paid off, with census data showing that the pandemic-era safety net program kept many millions of people out of poverty. The pandemic might have changed the way Americans see poverty, but it was only temporarily. When this investment ended after the health emergency was to be considered concluded, the situation for many living on the verge of poverty got worse, Riddell said. People are facing higher inflation, which is really proving a challenge for many households. There is no data available to estimate poverty rates for 2022 and 2023 yet. Can the United States completely eradicate the persistent issue of poverty that affects approximately 11% of the population? What actions are needed to combat poverty? Here are some opinions from experts. Never in the history of rich democracies does social policy happen instantaneously, Professor Brady said. It takes decades of political struggle to push for more generous social policies to reduce job poverty and inequality, and it takes political struggle to maintain the social policies you have. According to Desmond, there are 3 things the country should do to end poverty: make deeper investments, fund it through fair tax implementation, implement policies that fight the exploitation of the poor through overdraft fees and payday loans, and give low-income workers more options in terms of housing and unionizing, and end the segregation of the poor, making communities and school systems more inclusive. Rand believes that to tackle poverty, we need to both create a robust social safety net that provides the kind of protections and benefits that people need when they lose their job or when they get sick, and raise wages. Getting low-wage workers' wages up to a decent level would be a substantial benefit in terms of reducing poverty, he said. I think those are 2 things that can be done. There is no reason why we cannot. Newsweek's poll shows that 51% of Americans believe that higher minimum wages rather than strict work requirements for welfare recipients, 39%, would provide a better incentive for those on welfare to find work. Solving poverty won't only help the poor but also the rest of America. Death is expensive, Brady said. In our study, we found that people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are the ones who are really experiencing that poverty-related mortality. When somebody dies at 50, that's a breadwinner for a family, a caretaker parent that is dying, and that costs a family enormously, not to mention the medical expenses that go with the death. There is a moral duty to eradicate poverty, but there are also economic benefits to tackling the issue, CFAT added. In purely economic terms, people who have high incomes have more money to inject into the economy. When people are able to see a doctor for preventative care, less money gets spent dealing with really significant health care problems down the line. Kids who are fed properly and are healthy are more likely to become adults who are healthy and can contribute to the overall economic well-being of the country. So if you want to put in dollars and cent terms, there is a strong economic argument for tackling poverty. With the current situation in the United States, who is responsible for addressing poverty? The majority of respondents in the Newsweek survey believe that federal, state, and local government officials bear the responsibility for combating poverty. 62% of voters believe that the federal government is primarily responsible. Desmond agrees, saying that the government bears quite a lot of responsibility for tolerating so much poverty in this land of abundance, especially as federal programs to help people on lower incomes during the pandemic have proven so effective at tackling poverty. We can absolutely end poverty. We have the resources to do it, Desmond said. But we have to reject this scarcity mindset and this boring, pernicious, best we can do is the mentality that has gripped the policy debate, he continued. adding that America is currently lacking the will to end poverty. We used to have moral ambitions in poverty in America, he said. When the Johnson administration launches the war on poverty, they set a deadline. It wasn't just rhetoric, but as a collective public, Desmond added. And as a government, we are currently lacking this ambition. Economist Rebecca Riddell said, "Imagine what the country would look like tomorrow if anyone was paid a living wage, or if we really had an infrastructure that truly supported care work and valued it." The failure to address poverty in the U.S. isn't about a lack of good ideas or potential solutions. It's about a lack of political will. According to Professor Brady, the poverty level in America is the direct consequence of weak social policies, which are a direct consequence of weak political actors. And that is the principal reason, he added. It's not because we have people that behave worse than other countries. That has wrapped up our program today. Thanks for your watching and see you next time.